Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever this particular webinar finds you. My name is Mark Dupont. I'm the Executive Director of the National Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. I'll be facilitating this particular webinar entitled The Future of Law Enforcement. And just some housekeeping things. If anybody has any questions, just as we go through this, you can type it in chat. If for some reason at the end of the presentation we don't get to all the questions, we'll make sure we answer them within 24 hours. So just as a brief intro before we get started here, a little background on the Academy. We were formed in 2000 as a nonprofit member-driven organization under the guidance of Admiral Seiler, the 15th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard. And we also have a subsidiary, our International Maritime Law Enforcement Academy. But relative to this, why do we do what we do? The success of America's maritime security depends on the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the professionals out there that patrol, protect, and preserve our maritime domain. And that's very relative to the subject that we're going to talk about today. Additionally, we strive to make law enforcement better. We obviously are focused on the maritime domain, but to us, it's a greater community involving everybody involved in public safety. And in order to do that, we need to provide a scalable, exportable, and affordable resources to the officers in order to enhance this community as a whole. Which leads to this particular discussion and introduction of Charlie. Just a little background and why I felt that this was very important to have this webinar and actually some subsequent webinars about this. Our law enforcement community as a whole has a lot of challenges going on right now. And in order to really stem the tide, if you will, we have to have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, what the causes of those things that are going on, and how we might be able to affect them. Charlie Scheer and I made contact a few months ago. I learned about the survey that he was engaged in, and I was just fascinated with the data that he was collecting in cooperation with some other universities. A little background on Dr. Charlie Scheer. He's an assistant professor of criminal justice at the University of Southern Mississippi. His research specializations are in the fields of police workforce management, police training, organizational development, and police legitimacy. He has publications on police recruitment and retention strategies, police civil liberty, and a national assessment of police training capabilities. His research has been published in Police Quarterly, Policing and International Journal of Police Strategies and Management, Sheriff and Deputy, Justice, Research and Policy, and Law Enforcement Executive Forum. He also has publications through the RAND Corporation and the Department of Justice's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, spoken at many peer-reviewed academic and professional conferences, including the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice Conference, and the Illinois Risk Management Agency and the National Sheriff's Association Annual Conference. He's currently conducting a comparison of first-line supervisor leadership training programs from a national sample, a survey of potential police recruits to gauge desire to pursue patrol careers, and an examination of the use of differential marketing techniques used by police agencies and their impact on recruitment efforts. He also remains a part-time sheriff's deputy, so he still carries a badge. So with that intro, Charlie, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and we'll flow along nicely, and as questions come up, I'll feed them into you and interrupt if I see something that is important to ask at that particular stage. But without any further ado, all yours, Charlie.
That sounds great. Mark, thank you very much for having me work on this with you. And I'm pleased to present the information that we found out from this comprehensive study. As you and I know, there's a whole lot of background to how this got started, which we can get to, as you said, in subsequent training and webinars that we could do in the future regarding the big picture of the recruitment challenge. But first, let's go ahead and get started with the objective to this particular study. We engaged, and I say we, it was myself and a colleague, Mike Rossler from Illinois State, in searching to find information about potential fear points. We were trying to determine what potential law enforcement candidates thought of the recruitment process, the selection process, and the training process to see if there were things about those processes that scared them off, that they did not want to engage in a police career because of these things. And what happened as a result of us doing this is I actually started to meet with a number of practitioners, most importantly, Gulfport, Mississippi Chief Leonard Papena. And the sort of origins of the study were in conversations with him. We started wondering, why is it that police departments seem these days to just open the door and put applications on a table and wait for folks to come in the door? It doesn't make much sense in 2018 that model of recruiting is even still in existence. So we had a series of roundtable discussions, if you will, with students at my college, the University of Southern Mississippi, which is, I might say, somewhat of a very racially and ethnically and gender-wise very diverse criminal justice program. Well over half of our criminal justice students at the University of Southern Mississippi are female, and a large portion of those females happen to be African American. So this is a pretty diverse group here, and he was curious to know what is it about patrol career that interests you. So we called it the reverse recruitment, and that means that individuals who were interested in careers were also being recruited by departments, but they were recruiting the department. They were checking them out as well. So we decided to take those roundtable discussions to a survey capacity, and again, Mike Rossler from Illinois State helped me with this, and we arranged for 5 colleges, criminal justice programs, to be surveyed. And those 5 colleges are going to be announced shortly, here in the presentation. The main question that we had here is, why are so many students in college somewhat interested in police work, maybe at the federal level, maybe as a detective or something of that nature, but don't necessarily seem as interested in police patrol? So our overall research agenda was, we considered that maybe there are fear points. Maybe there's something about police patrol. Maybe it's something about the process of becoming an officer, having an intensive background investigation performed. So we set out about the agenda of trying to find what these fear points were. So we went and took this survey to college students and expanded it to include things like selection, polygraph examinations, and training, including, were they put off by the training academy? What about things like getting tased? What about things like getting pepper sprayed? What was there out there that existed that could potentially be a fear point? And I revert back to this email that I received from a student one day, and it says something very interesting, and I think your listeners will find this interesting as well, Mark. I'm very interested in a such and such police department. I've taken that out, but my only concern is becoming a police officer. I'm going to have a 4-year degree, and all I'm going to get is a police officer. This email is incredible to me. It really suggests a lack of, in my impression, information about the overall career of police officer, and we set out to sort of utilize the perspective of this student to see if that actually trickled down to specific items on a survey that they were just not interested in the career because of those things. So here are the 5 colleges that we looked at. We looked at the University of Southern Mississippi, the University of Massachusetts Lowell, Illinois State, Missouri State, and IUPUI in Indianapolis. It's important to note that not all criminal justice classes were criminal justice majors, and that we had approximately 772 total respondents. Here's the survey instrument: 17 items about the career, 15 about patrol work, 14 about training, 28 about the recruitment and selection process, and 14 on the role of police. And then we also asked some other supplementary questions about police patrol later on. So it was a pretty broad, about 100-question survey. We had Likert responses to the statements. This is the frequency tables for the overall survey results. just a tad more females answering the survey than males, close to, I believe that would be somewhat like 65% white respondents versus the more diverse that's down on that slide, and a pretty even approach as far as their year in the program that they were going through. Naturally, we think their 18 to 25-year-old group is represented. So let's go over the results of the questions pertaining specifically to the recruitment process. The first one to notice here, Mark, is that it seems to be a pretty easy bell curve, although there is variation in their interest in a patrol career. About 39% are indicating interest, with about 41% saying they're not necessarily interested in a patrol career. This is about what we expected to find on that question. The next one, we asked specifically if they had fear of going through a police patrol hiring process as they understood it. Many police administrators are thinking that these recruits may be intimidated by this process. I don't necessarily think that that's supported here. I think that they're not fearful. We're looking at about 65% or so saying, I'm not afraid of the patrol recruitment process. The next one is very interesting to me here, and that is we're asking if these individuals would be interested in police patrol only as a ladder to some other career, or in, you know, what I would interpret this to mean is some other position, but it suggests that they do have perception in the patrol task as part of a larger career ladder. Why this is important to me is later on we ask their knowledge specifically of this career ladder. So we do see here that they are interested in patrol to the tune of about half the respondents as a ladder to something else. We also asked, and this one is extremely powerful, what is it going to take for you to get through the process? We ask specifically if a mentor would be interested in helping them choose a patrol career. Mark, you and I have talked about this one at length, and it is definitely interesting to me to see that these young people are interested in mentoring as a part of the application and hiring process. Next, we see the thoughts that these student respondents have about their personal criminal history. And this can be read in multiple ways. You know, the first obvious way is whether or not they think that anything that is on their criminal history should not interfere at their potential career, but then also their confidence in going through a background investigation. So judging from this question here, the way I feel about the result that's shown on the screen is that a large majority of the respondents say that their criminal history does not interfere with their career plans, and whether that is pertaining to a certain item that they feel should be allowed, or whether they know the actual items is something that we could, you know, debate in analysis, which we're engaged in now when we do the more I guess the more complicated statistical analysis that we're doing. Similarly, we ask about their drug use, and you know, there's a lot of information about this coming out right now about this generation and their ways of thinking about drug use and their past drug history, and whether or not individuals in law enforcement think that that should be permissible. But I do think that there is an awareness being shown in this slide that there is a sea change occurring across the country with attitudes towards drug use. I'd like to know more in a future study about what specific drugs, you know, they have taken. That is a question that I'd like to follow up with on a future project. So this is an interesting and intriguing finding. Then again, we have a question here about social media. We know that these people, young people, communicate primarily through social media, even across the room. You know, they're talking to each other on social media. And here we have the expression that things that they have said on social media would potentially hurt or you know, interrupt their career plans if they were interested in patrol. Well, they don't feel that. They feel like you know, they disagree or strongly disagree that something they've said would hurt their chances. Again, this is the same sort of confidence level, the belief that, you know, social media use is a career barrier is not supported, you know, by this evidence. Finally, here we have a number of questions that we asked, and I'm going to talk about two results about the use of investigation tools in the application process. First off, they do believe that looking at someone's social media activity gives a character impression. I like this. I think that you know, with this generation and their attitudes towards the use of social media, it does display a confidence, but also at the same time a realism about the fact that they are, you know, very cognizant of what they are saying, especially if they are going into a you know, a police career. The next one is also an indication of that, in that it is a little bit, to me, and Mark, you and I have talked about this one at length. This is an indication to me that they are very aware of the perception of their generation, that they are expected to promote quickly, that they may be impatient. We asked if they believe or agree with the statement, people of my generation want an immediately successful career without paying their dues at an entry-level spot. And what we look at is, you know, a little bit over half saying, yeah, that's pretty much true about my generation. We are impatient, and we realize that. This is an informative tidbit here for police people that are in recruiting, or anybody who's interested in capturing these young people and getting them engaged in a patrol career or any sort of law enforcement. So we moved on then to questions about the academy itself. And, you know, we know that the police academy is something that takes a lot of commitment and takes a lot of you know, enthusiasm on their part to complete. And I actually, I wanted to just kind of give an impression, if you will, here of their knowledge of what goes on in a police academy. Mark, you and I have talked about this a couple times, and I have spoken about this to practitioners other than police chiefs. I've talked to some academy directors. We never do provide any sort of vision of what's inside that academy black box for a young person. They ride along, if they're allowed to ride along at all, and that's a completely separate discussion. But when they go out on a ride along, they don't get to see what's going on in the police academy. That to them, this is a great unknown. And for 45-ish% of the respondents to say that they have little knowledge about what takes place in the police academy is something that I think we need to address as a profession. What are we doing to reveal, you know, and again, this is a cultural issue. A lot of people do not want to disclose the mysteries of the police academy to a recruit. We have for a long time, and when I was in a police academy back in the 90s, this was a top secret, you know, what went on in there. So we got to, you know, come to a decision about whether or not we're going to reveal this information and what could be valuable in terms of recruiting, you know, by doing this. Similarly, I asked if attending a police academy was and we used the phrase deal breaker for police patrol. They didn't think this. They did not feel that attending an academy, even with a 4-year degree, this is very interesting to me because, again, anecdotally, a lot of people believe that folks with a 4-year degree don't want to go through an academy because it means we got to go back to school. That's not the case here. This is 5 universities, college criminal justice students, and they're saying, no, yeah, I definitely think that that's okay. It's expected. I need to learn how to do those things because I'm certainly not learning it, you know, in any other setting. So I think that this is an informative slide for the police manager, that they think that going to an academy is okay by them. Their fear about going through an academy is, however, something that needs to be addressed. It seems from this result here, and we just finished up the technical report for this and talked, you know, intimately, myself and Mike Rossler, about fear. Although it is not an extensive barrier, obviously, from these results, I think this is something we want to talk about If close to maybe a third of the respondents, maybe a little bit more, are either in agreement that they're afraid or don't really have a concise response, that there is a fear, then if a third of criminal justice students in college are afraid of the academy to some degree, then we need to talk about what they're seeing and what they expect out of that experience, especially if they think that they are all right with attending it. The next one here to me is even more interesting because we broke it down, this slide, by gender. And we see with the question of physical fitness training that there is widespread variation with intimidation and fear about the police academy physical fitness training. Males far more confident than females when it comes to academy physical fitness training. Such a wide disparity in the agree column and then in the strongly disagree column. You know, obviously half the males are saying that they strongly disagree that physical training is intimidating, but close to half the females agree that it is intimidating. So this is an important piece of information for the police manager and also for an academy trainer to look at how women are somewhat fearful of the physical training in an academy is important for us to know. We also asked about the length of the academy. Now, remember I had said, you know, anecdotally, I would think that if you're getting a 4-year degree and you have to go to the police academy, regardless of how long it is in your specific state or arena, you know, the federal academies or whatever it is that you're engaged in, they don't necessarily show a widespread disagreement with the time, but they are interested. My take on this slide is that they would like to know more about that. If I'm going, and I think this is one of those reverse recruitment points. This is a college student telling us, if you're going to require me to go to a long academy, I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's in that black box. Tell me more. And I like this slide. It puts the onus of disclosing information about the academy on us. So then we began to ask some questions about these individuals' impressions of the police patrol career itself. We start off here with some statistics on their being raised to respect the police, broken down by ethnicity. It is very interesting to me. And we did have a number of slides here, Mark, a number of tidbits that indicate ethnicity differences and variation. Notice how African Americans and white respondents to this survey varied very differently in their agreement about the phrase, "I was raised to respect the police." This is a challenge for the entire law enforcement community. We have been dealing with this issue of diversifying law enforcement for decades, and we have never really gotten to the point where we feel comfortable with any specific plan or program. I think these vary wildly. Here we see a good survey of college students who are taking these classes that differ tremendously in their base respect and how they were raised to think about police work. Even more importantly, the next one shows that they were asked to their belief as to whether or not the public should respect the police. This is a very basic concept, and here we have criminal justice students. It shows that African Americans responding to the survey had at least some conflict or some questions. It may be in the issue of respect. It may be in the issue of how they were raised or what the images of police are bringing to them. But notice, if you will, that our police departments nationwide are not in any way, I think, comprehensively reflecting the community that they govern or that they police. Well, here's one of the reasons why. If individuals have such a wildly variant impression of whether or not the police should be respected by the public at all, That's something that we need to address from a recruiter standpoint and from the profession itself. Is it unfair for the public to criticize police activities? In this day and age, the sample shows that they believe that the public has somewhat of a right to critique police behavior. This is the growing up in a fishbowl existence generation, and their belief that it's okay, it's acceptable, and that it's maybe even important for them to do these things. We see a good bell curve of interest in public criticism of police behavior there. Now, on to whether or not these impressions relate to their career plans. We have long talked about this in law enforcement. Does the new generation see police work as a negative career due to things such as the Ferguson effect, or whatever we've called it anecdotally? Does the level of respect that the police are currently receiving sway their decision to become a patrol officer or be a police officer? I'm not entirely sure that we see in this response a fear of disrespect clouding their career plans. What I see here is that there is some level of public respect that they think they should get should they engage in this career. I would be interested to see what your viewers of this webinar and individuals looking at our data, how they interpret this. As you mentioned, Mark, we're going to be going out on the road and talking about these things shortly. This is going to become a good talking point. What does this mean? Does this show that they are thinking that they are deserve respect or not? That's something we need to get past.
I agree.
How about physical fighting? And go ahead.
No, I agree. I think that's a critical point. And as we go on the road, I too am curious as to how people react and how they read that particular slide.
Yeah, there's quite a bit in here. That one and a few others. This one may also be interpreted by different departments in different ways. We wanted to know if they were afraid of physical fighting as a barrier to patrol interest. Well, I could look at this in two ways. I could say that individuals who answered the survey are not afraid of physical fighting in patrol work, but then I could look at the strongly agree, and neither, and say, well, that's close to, between a quarter and a third of the respondents are kind of wondering, what type of physical fighting in combat's going to go on. Again, here, depending upon the reader of this data, you could take away from this that we need to do a better job of communicating the physical aspect of the job, that maybe that there is something there that for this third that's definitely not disagreeing with this statement. Is there something they don't know? Beyond that, we ask about firearms. Well, in this day and age, with our attention is constantly placed on guns and the things that have transpired in the United States, we did want to know if the students who were in college taking criminal justice classes have any sort of base fear of firearms and how that relates to career planning. Well, just asking if they have a fear of firearms is interesting, and we don't see my interpretation of this is that there isn't a widespread fear of firearms on the part of criminal justice students. I would like to see this broken down by region, Mark. I would like to know which of these people who said they were strongly agreed that they have a fear, are they from a specific region of the country that we surveyed? So that would be of interest to me, maybe something we can report in the future. Then we asked some questions. This is very interesting to me about family approval and disapproval of their interest in a patrol career. Notice, if you will, that African American respondents give a much more, a stronger indicator of family disapproval of them becoming a police officer than, well, any other group. This is interesting from this perspective. I have long coupled this slide with the information about mentoring to say that we need to treat the potential African American applicant to patrol, somebody who's African American who comes to us and says, I'm interested in being a cop. Like, we've got to pair that person up with an individual who can go to these family members, these loved ones, and do more than just recruit from putting a stack of applications on a desk. We've got to start adopting a more, I call it the football coach recruiter, you know, the knock on the door, the going to the house, talking to family members. This is a very, very compelling piece of evidence that we are not doing enough, I know, and I see recruiters come into our college here quite a bit. I've been here 6 years almost, and the things that I see are not what I think this slide is telling us we need to be doing. Just a very compelling piece of evidence here. Likewise, the next one is asking that whether or not I'd be able, with a patrol career, to raise a family. Notice, if you will, that females in this sample are somewhat suspicious about the opportunity to raise a family than males, should they be a patrol officer. Again, you know, we could argue where this is coming from. I wonder if this is perhaps another indication, as the slide before was, that we're not providing mentors to females. Like, maybe the female officers could be communicating the realities of either how difficult it truly is or how much they were able to pull this off. You know, I raised my family while while being a patrol officer. I just think, again, that this is an indication of lack of information that they may be getting, and again, paired with the issue of recruiting from the perspective of a mentor, we can target this. Next would be a question about lifestyle changes. Well, a seasoned patrol officer would look at this, and I know those of you who are patrol officers who've been on the road who are looking at this are probably smiling, because to have close to 35-ish% or so of the respondents not really understand that serious personal lifestyle changes are going to occur when you become a patrol officer is possibly somewhat humorous to us. Here's part of the problem with this slide. If only half the sample strongly agrees that a serious personal lifestyle change is going to occur, what are we not telling these young people? Couple this slide with the information about social media, about tattoo policies, about, you know, all sorts of other things, you know, about, you know, lifestyle issues pertaining to your spouse, to your family. You know, this opens a huge door for the police recruiter to do more than what we're doing, to communicate the realities of a patrol career. And when I say that, I mean more than just the application process. You know, we bombard them with that information, but we're not giving them the information that, you know, that we're supposed to get them acclimated to that. How about salary realities? And you know, this again, this is also dependent on region, because if you recall, Mark, that we did talk to some people in different regions of the country, and we know that there are regions of the country where you can live rather well with a police patrol salary. Well, is lukewarm is what I look at this and see, that patrol salaries allow them to pursue their desired lifestyle, then we do need to communicate maybe something beyond the salary number. Maybe if you relocate to our department, here's what the housing looks like in this area. Here's how much you're going to get after taxes. Remember that a lot of these young people, especially in college, don't get that. They're not getting the life skill information from college, which, you know, that's another argument that we could go down that road. But we could go talk to them about salaries in a much more comprehensive manner, I think, than we're doing. How about their investigations interest? Look at this. We know that this is a kind of a very interesting part of police work. We know that they are thrilled with the opportunity to do things like go out there and be an investigator. This is very intriguing to me, but it's about what we expect. This is the media talking. We also see when we ask them about narcotics investigations as a specialized role that they, are also interested in that. They think that to be a narcotics officer is a thrilling proposition. They're interested very much in promoting to this. Then we ask about supervisor roles. Granted, this isn't nearly as attractive, of course, as being a investigator or a narcotics person, but there does appear to be here some interest in promotion. You've got close to, looks like about 41-ish%, I think, of people agreeing or strongly agreeing that they'd like to be a supervisor. But look at the contrast with this slide and the following one here that talks specifically about their knowledge of what a police sergeant does. It is very interesting to me, and this is going to be the subject of our next paper that's derived from this data that I'm working on with Mike Rossler. We're going to talk about the disconnect between interest in promotions and knowledge of what those promotional duties are. For the same number, roughly, of individuals to be as interested in promotion as saying, I don't know what that promotion entails, is a tremendous challenge to the police recruiter, is a tremendous challenge to the mentor. We have always relied on recruiters to bring information to these young people. Here we have an obvious area where this could occur that's obviously not occurring, at least from this sample. Remember, this is just a sample. Again, then here we ask about their knowledge of the patrol promotion process. When you're a patrol officer, how do you promote? What is the process of doing so? And, there's a bell curve here, but it also suggests, this is very interesting, half or so of the college student sample doesn't understand how to promote. They think perhaps that this is another black box, another mystery, and maybe we need to be breaking this down for them. When you are a patrol officer, this is what may occur. They're not getting that. Also, and more importantly, police departments understand what my generation expects from a career. No indication is given to me from this slide, and I guess, I'd love to again hear reactions to this, that they feel confident that a police department, and remember this is, regional specific, could very well be pertaining to the years of these individuals, in their age, but it doesn't appear as though they feel confident that police departments understand their career expectations. That's not good.
I think that goes to your point, Charlie, that going back to the mentoring thing, going back to the message that departments give, and how we reach out to this segment of the population if we're trying to recruit them. I think this big flat question mark right in the middle there, neither agree nor disagree, just speaks to that. I think that that answer comes from, well, I haven't talked to them well enough to know if they understand what my generation expects. I haven't gotten enough inside the black box view to feel confident that they understand that. I think this is another telltale of where we may be lacking in our recruitment efforts. Absolutely.
You hit the nail on the head. The lukewarm middle question mark response indicates, I really just don't know, what they think of me. And I've not had a sufficient exposure to what's going on inside that building over there. I just see them from time to time. I'm really interested, but I just don't get what I need to make an assessment of whether or not they like me. And that's hard. I think that the data speaks volumes about police departments here that don't allow ride-alongs, and boy, there's a lot of them that still haven't figured out how to get people in the door for that. I have long wondered how an individual is going to go to law school or go to medical school and put themselves through that without knowing what's going on in a law or medical career. Mm-hmm. Well, here we have a chance to do something about that. We've got a lot of people in criminal justice programs right down the street from police departments, and there's no conversation going on between those two institutions. So you're right. I also we only have a couple more slides of information and data here, but here's one that I think is very interesting to me. Couple this with the previous slide about information. I could arrest someone for marijuana possession in good conscience. I wonder if we took like a 3x5 card, Mark, and put it over this data result and asked your viewers, what do you think this graph is going to look like when I pull this card away? I would think that the vast majority of police leadership in this country would think that a young person today would be conflicted, would be, still not settled on the issue of enforcing drug laws. But here we have a very interesting result. It displays to me that these young people have grappled with this question already when considering a career choice. Mm-hmm. I think they're confident. I think that, when you've got close to half the respondents saying that they could do this, this is another case of anecdotal beliefs on the part of police departments that this generation just is not interested in enforcing drug laws, that they're all out there smoking marijuana. Well, that's not true here. It looks to me like they're willing to come to terms with the law, and maybe this, third on the other side is you're not interested in patrol career people, or maybe they're people that just have not, come to that conclusion just yet. But this is an interesting point. Far more interesting here is the belief that police officers engage in racial profiling. Again, we wonder at times if, and African Americans represented by the blue, that's the percentage of African Americans who strongly agreed or agreed. Anecdotally, we hear about things like what are we going to do to diversify our workforce? Well, with close to 2/3 of the sample that is African American believing that racial profiling occurs, we have a lot of work to do. And we need to dispose of, I think, the anecdotes and the politics, and get down to business about exposing what we are doing to these potential police officers. Mm-hmm. These are people that are in criminal justice classes. Are we doing anything to the African American criminal justice student or African American applicant to educate them as to what specifically our departments are doing? Are we willing to do that? I just don't know. Mm-hmm. Look at the disagree column. You look at that disagree column, we've got, just a wide disparity there. The next one is also belief that racial profiling or labeling your police officer as a racist is a barrier to patrol career interest. What if we put the 3x5 card here? I mean, this is the one that everybody believes is the deal breaker. Nobody today wants to become a cop because they think we're all racists. Well, yes and no. There is a disparity there with the two groups, but not a widespread disparity. I think that interestingly enough, the real disparity is with the Latino and Latina applicants or potential applicants, not with African American. I think that what we see here is that racial profiling, should they think it exists, is something that they feel maybe confident that if they were a police officer, they could change. Maybe that these people who are interested in patrol careers who are hidden in this, and we'd have to perform some regression to find that out. Maybe we need to address the issue of the concerned to make the police world a better place applicant. You know, maybe those people are hiding in this data. Maybe there's some folks in here who think, you know, I'm not afraid of being labeled as a racist if I'm a cop, but I'm going to get in there and I'm going to settle, you know, the score. I'm going to reach out to the community when I'm out there in a different way than I've ever been reached out to. Lots of possibilities in this slide that, you know, we don't normally think about. Last piece of data, Mark, is the one about on-the-job shootings. You know, again, we're not communicating the reality of use of force. And I want this particular slide to be of interest to your viewers for a number of reasons. The disparity there in the ethnicity responses, but also the fact that it is a bell curve. On-the-job shootings involving patrol officers are a frequent occurrence. Well, you know, if the aggregate is going to be bell curve-ish, and again, like the one you mentioned, we're just not communicating the realities of use of force. If they think that police are going to go out there and, you know, this is a frequent thing, or I just don't know if it is or not, we have a lot of work to do. And I think, you know, we have a lot of work to do is a good way to put this entire study into perspective. There are some limitations. We did not differentiate in our sample results in this slide presentation between majors and non-majors, but I don't really think that that necessarily may make too big of an impact. We did not ask any out west colleges to respond to this study, even though we are contemplating doing an out west component. We are looking at college students. That's definitely, you know, a potential limitation. These are not going to represent all of the people that are going to come knocking at the door. And remember that we did not also, or at least we didn't ask a question, we didn't report it either, of anybody's past history of firsthand incidents with law enforcement. This can be a tremendous barrier to patrol career interest. How will we use this survey depends on the people viewing it. I like to think that there's some confidence about their potential candidacy hidden in here. I do think that respondents are craving mentoring and that the responses provide an open door as to a type of mentor. Not the traditional mentor that we normally see, but again, the football coach type. The guy who comes in, or the female who comes in to the living room of these people and says, hey, look at me, you know, let's go out for pizza with my shift. You know, we'd like to have you and your spouse or significant other, you know, meet us at the department. I also think that there's an anecdotal belief that you know, these people are really afraid of what we're perceived as in the eyes of the public. That was the basic gist of what I've heard at several recruiting conferences over the last couple of years. You know, it's a common thing that everybody stands up and says, who would want to become a cop today with what we're perceived as? Not true. We just don't see that in this data. We see curiosity and even enthusiasm. I do think that we need to pay attention to the differences between ethnic and gender responses. And I just wanted to say here, to kind of cap it all off, Mark, next up for this potential study and for our next study is we need to sort of look at what constitutes successful recruitment. We do need a comprehensive assessment of the efficacy of recruit strategies. There are so few studies that have been done on that, and many of them just way too old. And we have never really focused on the impact of a mentor in police recruitment. That's a great thing lurking that we'd like to talk about, the styles of recruiting. What do you think about this, Mark? How do you kind of read this? And it's interesting to me that your viewers may have been exposed to this for the first time, and I'm interested to hear from them too.
Well, as we've talked from the initial onset and when we got the raw data about this particular survey, I just think it's so important to our law enforcement, public safety community to read into this data to help shape some of those challenges that they're facing. You and I have been around long enough, have traveled around the country, talked to hundreds of agencies, and they all are suffering issues related to recruiting, related to diversity, related to retention. Those are their key issues right now. And as we've talked about in the white paper that we did here in the Academy, looking at that change in people dynamics, those things are just getting magnified as each day goes by. And what we struggle with as a community is we are continuing to do the same things we did over and over again, dating back to when you and I were at the academy level, and wondering why those results are not changing the way we want them to. So leadership in our law enforcement community really has to take a look at this. And what this data really does is pull back the curtain a little bit. And I think the most significant takeaway is the myths that we shatter, right? I love your analogy. If I put a 3x5 card up against the responses here, what would you perceive those responses to be? And that,
Absolutely.
that is enlightening all to itself. And I hope what it tells everybody watching or listening is that you cannot approach this with what your preconceived notions are, because if you do, you will continue getting the results that you're getting. If you truly want to change that, you got to look at this from a different set of glasses, different perspective, and now adapt to that. And from a training perspective, that is the number one thing I've been preaching for decades, right? We cannot look at our workforce and continue to try to put the square peg in the round hole here and wonder why it's not working. So that element of this survey, I think, is so critical to everybody listening. And the next thing becomes, okay, got it. Now, what do I do about it? And you hit on those key things. You hit on the mentoring. Imagine, Charlie, if everybody listening or everybody in this law enforcement community, and actually, let's get conservative and not say everyone. What if 10 to 20% of that law enforcement community just changed how they mentored, how they recruited, and used that, your expression, which I love, the football coach approach to how I get more people interested in what we do. Imagine if 10 to 20% just opened up the black box and said, hey, you want to know what goes on here? Let me show you. This is what goes on here. What impact would that have on our recruitment challenges, our diversity challenge, our retention challenges? So I think that all of itself. I have a couple of questions that came up. We've got a couple minutes here. By the way,
Sure.
You were awesome on your timing. Generation. So you and I have talked a lot about generation. We, especially us old folk, us baby boomers, love to brand the millennials and oftentimes love to blame them for all the things that go wrong. But when you really study that generation and understand what their goals and objectives are and what motivates them, and you really adapt to that, they actually are such a tremendous asset. They have a lot of things that they do extremely well and much better than someone like me being a baby boomer. But the question that came up here is, when you made some mention of generation, are you looking at the millennial generation and or the homelanders, the new Generation Zs, the ones that will occupy the workforce actually at a larger percentage than what the millennials do as quickly as 2019? Now, before you answer, Charlie, my answer to that would be, if you take the segment and we go back to the slide about the breakdown of the people that were surveyed here, actually, because so many of them are in that younger 18 to 25 age category, that actually is the homelanders. And the interesting part for those listening, this is literally right around the corner, 2019. Unfortunately, we haven't really paid that much attention to this particular audience. And we have to realize that this audience is unique in that This is an audience that grew up with nothing but a smartphone. They know nothing else other than having a smartphone. There is an audience that grew up with a country that's been at war for their entire lifespan. This is a generation that's growing up with active shooter or school shooting type events happening on a quote unquote regular basis. At least this is their perception. And this is also a group that is used to 5 screens. We talk about multitasking. You know, I have 2 screens in front of me right now, and I have just enough span of control here and attention to maintain my visibility on those 2 screens. But this particular generation grows up in a world where there might be 5 screens because they have a thirst for information, and they fear that they may miss something if they're not connected to all these information sources. And last but not least, I mentioned it, they are a generation of angst, meaning they've literally been raised with a degree of anxiety, whether that anxiety is about warfighting, whether it's about active shooter, whether it's about the economy, having gone through a recession and things like that. So I did a lot of talking there, Charlie, but the question was, does this generation consider the new generation the Homelanders? And my quick answer is yes. I'll turn it over to you if I erred in my answer.
No, I liked your answer, and I'll tell you, I have 2 caveats about generational discussions, and I've seen so many. You know that this has almost become a cottage industry. You know, the generational discussion at a police recruitment conference is beginning to be as germane to a police. I mean, you see just as many of those as you see donuts and coffee at a police conference. Like we are inundated with information about what we are supposed to think about, you know, somewhat arbitrary groups of people, and that's kind of something that I'm a little wary about for this reason. This particular study indicated to me 2 things in that regard. Number one, millennials are already in positions of authority. You know, they're sergeants by now. They're out there. They're the ones that are actually making the plans to recruit. You know, these are folks who are in their 30s. They're already moved on. You know, we had a bunch of information in the early 2000s, late 90s about the challenge of recruiting Generation X, when they were already captains by that time. So I think that what we really have to be careful with when we get engaged in this generation discussion is the rapid pace of that discussion being obsolete quicker than we think it is. Mm-hmm. And so that said, something that you pointed out in your response that I think is really does you know act as a potential answer to the question is that I believe that these people, and the ones who answered our survey, and you know the vast majority are 18 to 25. I am not entirely sure that they are as requiring the information overload, connected this and that we think they are for this purpose. Having dealt with these people now for 6 years and been a college professor instead of a full-time deputy like I was, I am shocked at how, and there's actually a phenomenon out there called internet hangover. They really are just absolutely craving face-to-face mentoring and information. There's so many ways I could talk about this, and maybe in a future discussion of female recruiting we could get into this. But the opportunities that our female students have had to interact with a female officer, and they literally will disappear. They will go off on their own, and because they have real life questions that they've never had an opportunity to talk about, and they just don't want to talk about that stuff with a screen in between. To this generation that we're talking about in this survey, they're constantly bombarded with go on our website, it's like our generation hears when we're told to press 1, press 2 with a voicemail. Their generation is just really craving, as you can see from the results, mentoring. Whether or not this is something that is appropriate for millennial generation or the ones that you call homelanders or whatever that we've agreed to label them as, is something that we need to talk about. If a 35-year-old person is a recruiter now, and a 20-year-old person is not ascribing to whatever characteristics we've labeled a 35-year-old person to be, then maybe we can put these millennial people in the driver's seat of a recruitment drive, a recruitment process, and see how they operate. They're finally able to assume the responsibilities that we were afraid to give them years ago. Let's turn the recruitment responsibility over to them. Mark, and I'll end with this. I've got a department that I know has come to visit our students that when they sent the recruiter, they sent the guy who was retiring. That's not, I think that's a sign. That's a red flag. And maybe we could improve or start a conversation about improvement around that question that was asked, around who are the recruits we're talking about, but more importantly, are millennials now in charge of our recruitment effort, and can they speak that language? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, I think you hit on something that, and we could go off. It's actually dangerous when you and I get in conversation because we can look at the clock and we could be here for a couple of hours. And I think it was, when we had discussion about this particular webinar, I mean, we came up with 4 different ideas about 4 different ways that we could go down this particular pathway. But relative to this particular thing, you hit on something that I think is the takeaway for those listening. You hit a very critical component. We run the risk when we try to generationally categorize a workforce, whether it be law enforcement or manufacturing or anything. You jeopardize that you are branding them in such a way that you think that is the square box that we're going to paint around this particular audience, and that's how we're going to talk to them, that's how we're going to manage them, that's how we're going to motivate them, and so on and so forth. And we learn in training, for anybody that is a true educator, master trainer level, not just someone that's been designated to train, but someone that really gets into the science of this, we learn, although there are different learning styles, and yes, a generation may have a particular learning style, we've learned that not everybody fits into that box. So the most effective training program, the most effective recruitment program, the most effective any program has to have the word adaptive built within it. Meaning, and you raised some points when you were going over the survey about regional, right? A recruiting effort, a mentoring effort in Chicago might be very different than the recruiting and mentoring effort that goes on in Tallahassee, where I am, right? And that's just because of all the things that are going on at that particular time, and what will work in that environment and what won't work in that environment. And if we just check the box, let's send the guy who's retiring to do our recruiting, because you know what? That's what we do, and we don't adapt to what those unique needs are, then I think we will suffer the consequences that many organizations are suffering now. So to wrap this up, I've left Charlie's contact information here. Charlie, I'll speak for you, but I'm pretty sure you would love to hear feedback and or questions or comments from those listening or later watching. Here's his contact information. And additionally, if for some reason you would like to get a copy of the study, Charlie, of course, can forward it. We can forward it here. We'll post it up on our website. Charlie will have a website. Do you have that website now, what that address is, where you're going to post the actual technical report?
It was just posted yesterday on the University of Southern Mississippi's website. And Mark, what I'll do is I will send you the direct link and you can post it if you like.
Perfect. We'll do that. And then for everybody listening, it is our intent. We think that this is such a important issue. It is our intent to follow this on now, getting into deeper weeds about some of the things that Charlie revealed by the results of this study, and whether they are talking about retention, whether they're talking about female recruiting, whether they're talking about just recruiting in general. Our plan is to continue to roll this type of webinar series out and also provide actual in-depth training about how to now address this particular issue within our department. So I encourage everybody to stay tuned. There's more to follow. Charlie, any final comments before we call it a day?
Thanks for having me, and I very much appreciate you getting this out. Hope it can help some folks.
Thank you, Charlie, for the time, and you're on to a good thing, and so keep doing what you're doing because I think this audience can use it. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and I look forward to talking to you next time.